In this lesson, we're talking about open chords. This is the first set of chords most guitar players learn. And in the previous lesson, if you're kind of doing this in the sequence of the lessons that I've laid out, we learned 3 of the open chords, and we're going to relearn them here real quick just so that this is a complete lesson. But essentially, we're going to learn 8 chords, major and minor, and then you're going to have some playing examples to get these under your fingers. It's a pretty simple lesson. It's just designed to give you the materials you need to start making some music. Once you're done with this lesson, moving on to our 8th note strumming lesson is a really great place to go because by that point you're able to play some pretty simple tunes in their entirety. Ultimately, all of this is geared towards getting you to make music as quick as you can while also understanding what you're doing and building a solid foundation for the future of your guitar playing. To that end, all we're doing in this lesson is I'm showing you these chords and I'm showing you some ways to work on them and get them under your fingers. In the video description below, you're going to find links to the PDF that goes with this lesson, to the links to the other lessons in the series, and then also links to our live lessons where you're more than welcome to come and ask questions and have me explain things in real time to you. We do them twice a week. The schedule typically is Wednesdays and Saturdays, and they're free. Come on down. If you want to make sure that you don't miss any content or that you don't miss any of the live instruction or new lessons or backing tracks or gear demos or any of the things we do on this channel, please hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so that when we go live, you actually get a notification that we're there. The first 3 chords we're going to look at are the same ones that we did in the very first guitar lesson video, but we have an example here and we're going to use these for the rest of this video too, so we're going to combine them in with this. The A major chord, we're going to start with your first finger on the 3rd string up on the 2nd fret. Put your 2nd finger on the string above it, which is the 4th string 2nd fret, and then your ring or 3rd finger on the 2nd string 2nd fret, so they're all in a line. Now, as I said in the previous video, you can play this a lot of different ways. You can go 1, 2, 3, you can go 2, 3, 4, you can just take your first finger and bar it across. But for the purposes of learning these chords in a way that's going to help you actually get all of these chords happening in time and sounding good together, I suggest doing it this way, with the first finger in the middle and the other 2 fingers surrounding this. And you're going to see why in a second. So this is the A major, and we're going to strum it from the 5th string down. Make sure that all of the notes in the A major chord actually sound out cleanly. We don't want to hit the 6th string. Even though that note is an E and it's also in the chord higher up, we don't want it to be the lowest note in this chord. Otherwise, it's going to sound like what we call a chord inversion. We'll talk about that later on. If you notice, my thumb up here is actually allowing my hand to get all of the fingers in such a tight space. Now, I'm a fairly large person. I have very big hands. And sometimes I get complaints from students that they can't fit their fingers in like this. But the reality is that this particular chord fingering allows me to play all 3 of those strings cleanly and then not hit the open strings on either side of those fingers. If I do it the way that you see in most books, I'll end up blocking things. So that's another additional bonus for this kind of fingering. So that's the A major chord. The D major chord, you're going to keep your first finger in the same place. And you're going to put your 2nd finger on the 1st string 2nd fret. And your ring or 3rd finger is going to be on the 2nd string 3rd fret. It's going to be this little sideways triangle looking guy right here. Now, we're going to strum this one from the 4th string down. Those are the notes that we want. We don't want to hit everything because then it sounds like that. You have to be careful about what your strumming hand does because the notes that are X's on the top of the chord diagram, those notes we don't want to hear in this. If there's a 0, remember we play that string open without a finger on it, and then the numbers above them, those are the fingers you use, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we're practicing the change between these 2 chords, the one thing to remember is that we have a common finger. Your first finger is the same in both of these. So when you practice a chord change, one of the things that you can do is without strumming, without including this little bit of work here, you can practice going between one chord to the next. And if there's any finger that's the same between both chords, like there is in this one, you just keep it in place and move the other fingers around it and just get used to that movement. Once you get that, and that might take a lot of repetition. A lot of times I tell my students, do this 15 or 20 times before you start working on the other stuff. And then if you run across a chord change that you really have difficulty with over the course of your practicing, go back and beat it up another 15 or 20 or 25 or 50 times. The repetition is what gets this under your fingers and builds your muscle memory. This is what actually gets this stuff to happen at the speed of thought. The 3rd chord And we're doing these basically in the way that they're going to appear on the worksheet so that you can play these as examples, is the E major chord. Now the E major chord doesn't share a common finger with the A and the D chords, but it does share a string. So you take the first finger on the third string from the A chord, and you can just slide it back 1 fret, and then put your other fingers on the second fret on the 5th and 4th strings. All right, and you play all of the strings on E major. So this kind of practice, you're just sliding back and forth between those two chords using your index finger as kind of the guide, and then just arrange the fingers around that. The first playing example here uses these 3 chords. We're doing 4 strums per chord. I'm not going to get too much into the rhythm part of this. We just want to make sure that you're able to take these chords and change them in time without stopping between chords too much. So we're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the best things that you can do is practice these with your metronome, which keeps you in time. Mine is set to 60 beats a minute. All right, and that gives me enough time to work on this to keep it consistent. It's going to keep you kind of honest. So what happens is that you're playing 1 strum per click, 2, 3, 4, and then when you get to the next chord, you don't really have time to make that change like one of these kinds of deals. All right, you want to get used to the point where everything moves at the speed of thought, because the reality is that when you make music, you don't have time to think about where the next chord is. So we want to build that skill now. We don't want to have to pause while we're singing or we're playing with another musician in order to get from one chord to the next. It just disrupts the song. So the metronome kind of keeps you honest with your time changes. We're going to add the G major as our 4th chord, and this is going to give us the chords necessary for the second exercise. Now G major, this is another one of those where there are multiple fingerings. A real popular one that gets taught is the 3-finger version, where your first finger is on the 5th string 2nd fret, middle finger is on the 6th string 2nd fret, and then use your ring finger on the 1st string on the 3rd fret. That sounds like that, and that is perfectly serviceable. I kind of prefer this version where we actually have 4 fingers, and the only difference is that that 3rd finger goes up to the 2nd string, and then your little finger goes onto the 1st string. There's a difference in sound. I just kind of like the fact that this one's a little brighter, but then this also gives us a common finger between the G chord and the D chord. It makes it easier to get from G to A because we have an adjacent finger where we can slide down. And overall, I just think it sounds better, and it's usually more in tune on most people's guitars. If we look at exercise number 2, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exercise 3, we combine all the chords we know to this point. We have G major, D major, A major, and E major. And one of the cool things about this is that when we go from G to the D, the ring finger is common. When we go from D to A, the first finger is common. And when we go from A to E, the first finger actually is adjacent, so we slide on the same string. The purpose of this one is basically to get you used to this idea that you never pick your hand up completely off the guitar. The only hard one is going from the E back to the G. If you're having difficulty getting any notes to ring out, keep in mind that you shouldn't be collapsing any of your finger joints. You should be keeping the fingers as arched as possible, because what that does is that gives the finger a clear path straight onto the string. It also directs the force that you're pressing down with a little bit more completely so that you don't have to push quite as hard. It makes it a little bit easier in the long run for you to play. But the most important thing is that you want to make sure that all of the notes we're supposed to hear ring out in these chords. We want to make sure we hear everything. Let's talk about minor chords. The first chord is going to be E minor. Typically, the difference between a major and a minor chord version with the open chords is that you take one finger away or move one finger our note down a string. In the case of E major, here's the E major. If we make it minor, we just take the first finger away. That one note difference is really important because we don't hear the third string. We don't hear whether or not it's major or minor. If I was to mute that string so you don't hear it, see, that sounds the same. That's essentially what we'll call a power chord. So you want to make sure that your ring finger is arched enough that it doesn't touch or press down on the third string accidentally and block us from hearing that note. Right, so that's E minor. Exercise 4 adds the E minor into some chords that we already know. We have D, E minor, G major, A major. Mind where there are common fingers. So C major is typically learned very early on, but it is one of the trickier chords to learn because the orientation is a little bit different than everything else. Your first finger is going to be on the second string on the first fret. The difficulty there is that we need to hear the first string open and the third string open on either side of it. So you want to make sure that you're not blocking that by having the finger two sideways. If you have your thumb sideways, it's also going to make it difficult. You really want to make sure that your thumb is centered behind your hand for this, and that will, like I said before, allow your finger to come around and actually have a clear line of attack right on the string. Your second finger will be on the fourth string on the second fret. Same thing, you want to make sure that you're not blocking the string below it. And then your third finger is going to be on the fifth string on the third fret. And we want to make sure that we're not blocking the string below it where your second finger is. Right? The sixth string, we try and leave that out. Just like with the A chord, this E note is actually part of the chord, but it's not the root, and it turns the chord into kind of a chord inversion. So we'll talk about those later on. We just want to make sure that the lowest note that we hear is the fifth string. You can take your thumb, touch the side of the string and mute it, or your ring finger can actually move up just a little bit. You cheat it up so it touches the sixth string from underneath, not where it's on top of it, where it's going to sound it. All right. By doing that, though, you might actually give your fourth string a little bit more clearance too. This is one of those things you just kind of have to play around with. In addition to the C major, we're also going to look at A minor. A major is what we started with at the beginning of the lesson, and it looks like this. We're actually going to play A minor, which happens to look a lot like your E major chord, but down a string. So your first finger is in the same place it was in the C chord. This is going to become important in a minute. It's on the first fret on the second string. Second finger is going to be just like the C chord on the second fret on the fourth string, but your ring finger, instead of being here on the fifth string, it's going to be on the third string on the second fret. And physically it looks like the E major. And it sounds like that. So exercise number 5, we start with A minor, and because we have two fingers that are common between A minor and C major, make sure that you're only moving the ring finger right now. Get used to this. So A minor, C major, G major, D major, back to A minor, C major, G major, D major. We'll just end on the A minor. The last chord for this lesson is going to be D minor. Now D major, the second chord that we learned, looks like your little sideways triangle, and the note that changes here is going to be the first string. Instead of the second fret, we're going to have a note on the first fret. So your fingering is going to look a little bit different. First finger on the first string, first fret, ring finger on the second string on the third fret, and then your middle finger will be on the third string on the second fret. And we're going to play from the fourth string down, just like the D major. So exercise number 6, G major, D minor, C major, back to G major. Now when I go from G major, we'll repeat this. G major, your third finger will stay the same going to the D minor. Going to the C major, though, we actually have these two fingers just go up a string. And then you got to reposition your third finger. Right? So here's D minor. There is C major. Right? Look for the things that are consistent or similar between two chord shapes and use that as kind of like your hook. So if I'm practicing these two chords, I might actually just take the first two fingers and practice moving them back and forth, up and down a string. All right? And then try and incorporate the ring finger and get that whole thing. And remember, we do our best work when we're practicing this stuff without actually strumming. And then once you get it, practice going back and forth and making sure that we hear all of the notes. So let's take a look at number 6 one more time. G major, common finger to the D minor, transition to the C major, just kind of scooting up a little bit, and back to the G major. Because G major and C major are in the same keys a lot of the time, if you're in the key of G major, C is going to be there. If you're in the key of C major, G is also going to be there. We have to really get used to the fact that this really awkward chord change needs to be mastered fairly quickly. So what you really want to do is just grind it out. I don't have anything helpful for you on this one. There is no common fingering. Your ring finger, you can always look at it like your ring finger goes between the 2nd string on the 3rd fret to the 5th string on the 3rd fret. So that might kind of be your hook on this one to practice. All right, so we're going G to C. All right, and then these two fingers, that orientation is kind of the same physically, so maybe practice that and then try putting it all together. This is one of those ones you're going to have to find what works for you and do it a zillion times so that we don't have to wait for you to get from one chord to the next when you're playing. Below the video here, there's going to be a link to a playlist, and that playlist is going to have all of the lessons in this series in order. This is actually the 2nd or 3rd video in this series. So you're going to have the very beginning, and then as we work through progressively explaining the instrument, how to play it to you, there are lessons on chords, on technique, on rhythm. We also have other playlists where we work through the music theory and fretboard layout and improvisation and soloing. We have lessons for blues and jazz and funk and rock. A little bit of everything, as well as all the backing tracks to practice with. So please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when we actually put out new lessons about once a week, backing tracks about once a week, live stream lessons we do a couple times a week. There's a lot of stuff here for you, but you'll only know that it's there if you subscribe.